Good morning. We'll be just getting started in a moment. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning, where we're going to be talking about UX for all, building a user experience culture across your organization. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Perfect. Thank you, Alan. So just some quick housekeeping rules, just saying that the session is being recorded and we will send out a link to that afterwards. Also, please do share with any colleagues that were unable to attend this morning. There's a Q&A box that you'll see, and that's for any questions that you have for any of the speakers today. And I have been informed that they're looking forward for some challenging questions, so please don't disappoint them and send them in, and we'll try and cover off as many of them as we can. And you'll see there's also a chat box, and that's really for more any sort of technical or support questions. So if there's anything like that, please put them in the chat box and questions into the Q&A box. Thanks, Ellen. So I'm Joyce Harmon. I'm Head of Client Services here at Hart Square and joined by our Managing Director, Alan Peristrello. But delighted to have our two guests today. We have Anil. Anil, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I'm Anil Ramdam. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the RTPI.
Perfect, thank you. And we have David.
Hello, I'm David Spector, Head of Digital Services at Smart Impact.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. So we'll find out a bit more about them in a little while. So just for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, we are a consultancy practice, and really what we're all about is enabling digital and change capability within the not-for-profit sector. Lots of statistics about our experience and history, but I'm not going to go into details on those. So I'm going to hand over now to Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. Good morning, everyone, and thanks again for joining us today. This is our final webinar for 2024, and I think we're ending on a very positive note. I'm really excited to be doing this webinar today with our guests, some of whom I've worked with, some have not, but really the theme here is all about user experience. And one that's got a slightly different take on it, UX for all, and that's about building a user experience culture across the organization and looking at it beyond just the typical touch points that we typically see. So without further ado, it's always good at this point to sort of set the scene. And for some people, UX, what does it mean? What is it? Most of us probably get it, but it's worth starting again here just to set the scene. So UX stands for user experience. It refers to the overall quality of the interaction that individuals have with a product, a system, or a service. And so in terms of components that make it up, accessibility is a very important component for the foundations in terms of UX. That can be accessibility for disabilities, but it could just be general accessibility. Color contrast, looking at how things display on devices in low light, etc. All of these are important points that need to be taken into account. Aesthetics, it's really the design, and I think this is the area that traditionally, and I think in the early days, people talking about UX, I got distracted and focused a bit too much on the aesthetics of UX. It's an important component, but it's no more important than accessibility or indeed the functionality. The functionality is really important. That's what people come to your website or to your service or whatever the interaction is. And so the functionality is defined by the thing that they need to achieve, the job that needs to be done. And then usability is really about kind of the ability to make sure that everything follows a common pattern, people know where to find information, and it's easy to use. And ultimately, all of those kind of core components are centered around one thing, and that is around solving the user's needs. What is the thing they've come to do? What is the overall objective? And I think it's important to look at those in a kind of balanced view. Ideally, I'd have made the needs kind of as big as the other circles. Because I think that we sometimes get lost in the importance of solving the customer or the donor or the member or whatever the stakeholder's definition is. It's about solving their needs. And sometimes we get a bit lost. Typically, we get a bit lost, I think, in functionality. And I think today's guests are going to talk about how achieving that, functional goals are important, but it's also about balancing usability, aesthetics, and accessibility to achieve their needs. So what is a goal of good UX? Number one for me is enhance user satisfaction. So people come to your website or to your service, and this could be an in-person event, and they have an expectation. And whether they'll voice that expectation or not, that expectation is there. And it's really about trying to make sure that you've met or exceeded that expectation. And if you do that, you improve satisfaction. Improve usability and engagement is really kind of core to everything that we're trying to communicate today, because if you can improve that usability, you either improve its ability to be used again and again and again, you're removing barriers, but you're also improving its ability to complete the task. So today we'll hear from our guests about how a complex user journey could have had negative impacts in the person's ability to go through it through usability issues, and addressing those issues allows for an overall improvement in the user satisfaction, and everything sort of builds on top of that. When you get those two previous goals correct, you build trust and long-term loyalty, and that should be an ultimate goal for anyone in our industry, or any industry really, but specifically in the context of membership and charities, where creating and maintaining those sticky relationships is critical to our ongoing ability to deliver our service. So looking then at the importance of user experience in nonprofits, to be honest with you, it's quite hard actually finding statistics to support this. I think there isn't a lot of research in the not-for-profit space. All of the research that I found seems to be very American. And actually, in preparation for this webinar, our guests and us kind of agreed we probably should look at doing something about that. So keep an eye open. Maybe we'll be coming to you for some specific research on this topic, because I do think there is a lot of value to be shared and gained in our community of not-for-profits around better understanding of user experience. I thought this was an interesting stat in that 13%, which doesn't initially seem like a large number, but in the context of donors who are already donating, 13% would likely donate again if their user experience was improved. And that's a study comparing the UNICEF and Red Cross websites from a few years ago, just in terms of some tweaks and enhancement that were made and direct improvement. Now, 13% is actually quite a lot if we're talking about pounds and pence, things that actually make completed donations. Looking then at what kills donations online, and this is from the Nielsen Norman Group. Nielsen Norman is a consultancy that really focuses on UX capability, tools, and research. And this was a specific study that they did across donors and volunteers, not-for-profit charity websites. And again, this is an interesting stat. 45% of people who'd said that they would not complete their donation journey stated usability problems as their key issue. Not necessarily next in order, but an unclear call to action, which I find really challenging to understand. The call to action should be donate now, pay, thank you. They should be really quite simple, straightforward, call to action. But they get lost sometimes. Quite often, I think if we think about it, we're all familiar where those call to actions are not very clear. Content issues, a staggering 35% listed content issues, and these are all things like unclear fonts, unclear font weights, unable to understand what the core kind of message is, and that's sometimes just about making sure that the hierarchy of content is well displayed, but also just the ability to search and to find content can help, can not help, or can hinder people making those donation journeys. And then the overall service offering not really being aligned. So of all of those four sort of factors, the one that's in our control in terms of presentation and usability, they're all in our control. We do accept sometimes that the service offering, it might be your cause or your particular membership offering isn't aligned to the person, and they may not go ahead with it. But I think those are quite sobering stats to look at. Moving on to sort of a more broader sort of commercial understanding, not necessarily focused just on NFP or membership, but 1/3 of consumers will walk away from a brand they already love after just one bad experience. And that's from a PwC 2023 Consumer Intelligence Report, which is really interesting for me because I think about my own behavior, and there are times when there are brands, we know and love, and then they let us down because the user experience has shifted. And it does make you think, do I go and find an alternative option? Now, that's still relevant for us in terms of the NFP space, because we don't want people thinking about where else they could do their time, volunteering perspective, their pounds from a donations perspective, but even the membership space where we have this kind of, ability to depend on our loyal members. If 1/3 of them are prepared to question, changing their brand, it just makes that renewal just that bit harder. And then finally, just in terms of the same report, I thought this was an interesting point to bring our guests in as well, just to quickly see what their thoughts are in terms of the correlation of what most people value in their customer experience. Now, on the x-axis, we've got the level of importance of customer experience, so how much people value it in terms of that particular aspect of a service offering. And then on the y-axis, we have whether people are prepared to pay more for it. And I thought it was really interesting that probably the highest collection of things around efficiency, convenience, friendly service, easy payment, knowledgeable service, etc., all up here in the top. And interesting, actually, human interaction and personalization, not featuring as high as I probably thought they would, but replaced by things that, if we're honest, we value in our day-to-day interactions with brands. So I'd be interested just to know if our guests have any thoughts on that. Over to you, David.
I mean, I think that the thing with user experience is that if we don't think of it as user experience and just think about how we live our lives, it's a prevalent concept in everything we do. And I look at this and I say, we do put a lot of effort into personalization these days because we believe that that is something that engages the end user more. But ultimately, no matter how personalized an experience is, if I can't actually complete my journey that I came to the website to start, then actually all of the personalization becomes irrelevant. So this is actually very important to recognize that sometimes you put all of the effort into the wrong places, and some of the best return on your investment is in other places where you might find it's actually lower hanging fruit. And we'll cover that when we get into the more discussive element of this webinar this morning.
Yeah, thanks, David. Any thoughts from your perspective, Anil, in terms of your sort of experience with the RTPI?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with this, because personalization is something we're working on as well, or at least we're thinking of pushing forward. But you can't get to personalization unless you actually do the efficiencies. You can't, unless that journey is seamless and people can actually get to what they need to get to, and the actions is there, for example, if the CPD or whatever it might be they want to do, then they've hit their action. That's great, and then we can do personalization. So I think this completely makes sense. We need to get the simple things done, and the user journey is so important. Apart, with that seamless, whatever you're trying to do, pay your membership or whatever it is, has to be so straightforward and easy. Especially nowadays, it should be.
Yeah.
Say one more thing on this, Alan, is that I think human interaction should actually be a big red circle that covers all the other ones, because that's fundamentally what it boils down to.
Well, it's an interesting point, actually, because in the same research report, there is a big bent on terms of different generations, so Generation Z versus kind of other generations in terms of how much they value human interaction. And I think the gist of it is to try and say that whilst we acknowledge the importance of technology, the increasing importance and prevalence of technology, specifically with the use of AI, but then how does the human interaction augment all that? And I think there's an interesting story that you're going to tell us in a bit about how the human interaction is also part of user experience, specifically for the RTPI. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know we'll get some interesting perspectives from you at some point, I'm sure, today on AI in this perspective. So moving on then, I think, and some of these actually align with things that Anil has just actually said. And so I always like to use quotes to help illustrate a point. And this is from a guy called Jared Spool, who's one of the founding principals of a consultancy in the US called User Interface Engineering. These guys have been helping, the biggest brands in the world kind of make sure that their user experience is as good as it can be. And I think this quote is great in the sense that user experience is not just about usability. It's about culture, habits, and the way we interact with the world around us. And that's kind of really the nucleus of what we wanted to get across today, that if you're looking at user experience as just something that sits on the website, or it might be on an app, or it might be in a portal, there's a lot more to this, and it should be seen in that broader context. And then linking, I think, really to something that Anil was saying, is this concept around how simple is actually quite hard. And I use this as an example, and I think this is something that Steve Jobs was trying to communicate around the time that the iPhone was initially launched, and it was competing against a number of other smartphone-esque type offerings. And someone asked him, why is your product going to succeed better? And the nucleus was that they were going to take something that was inherently complex. And if we think about it now, we take it for granted. But back in 2014, if you're thinking about the sort of initial sort of smartphone journeys, those were quite complicated things to achieve. And why I think Apple succeeded is because they took the nucleus of something that was quite hard and complex, and they simplified it. They made it easy to use. I think the ultimate illustration there is that my parents both very quickly moved from other phone brands to Apple purely on the basis that it was easy to use. And my parents love them dearly, but they're not necessarily technically adept users. So if you can get users like that on board because the user experience is great, it does open up a massive opportunity for you to improve other areas and to build that loyalty. So I thought that was always a nice one to move on.
You couldn't have had a session on user experience without a quote from Steve Jobs, right? It is just de rigueur.
It is probably it. I think also it's worth noting that when I did go looking for quotes on this topic, let's just say it's fair to say they're not household names apart from Steve Jobs.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. So I just want to bring up a poll. So just let me launch that. So what we're asking is, which area of your organization currently receives the most UX focus? So I'm just going to let that run for another couple of seconds. Interesting, we've had a great question come in, which we will get to in a little bit around AI. So I think David will quite like that question, but we'll get that in a bit. So please do continue putting your questions in. So let me just let this run for another couple of seconds. Interestingly, the public-facing website is coming up as the strong contender, kind of next, followed by CRM system. So I'm just going to end that poll and let me then share the results. So yeah, so the public-facing website, 75% of people with us this morning. And then quite evenly, sort of CRM, in-person, around events or shops or volunteering or member or donor portals. So coming to you, David, does any of that surprise you or not surprise you? Kind of what's your thoughts on
This is exactly what I would expect, because I think user experience has historically, certainly in our sector, been associated with digital experience, and the public-facing website is the most obvious channel for that. What I find actually quite telling here is call or service center. I'd almost say that's customer support in many respects, member support. Maybe it's not had any responses because it's referred to as call or service center. No one considers that function to be a call or service center. But if you were to change that to be just support for your consumer base, I would suggest that it's quite telling that that hasn't got a focus on the user experience, because if I think about that, that's probably a key experience sort of trajectory that I'd really want to focus on. Do people get serviced when they call up with issues? And actually, interestingly enough, if you get all of the UX stuff with regard to the public-facing website, just as an example, correct as best as you can through valid sort of insights and test-driven sort of design, what you find is that you have less of a demand theoretically on support outside of that channel. So people calling up saying, I can't do this, can't do that. But as a last resort, it should be considered as important as everything else. So the fact that it doesn't even register on this poll is quite telling.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that as well, and your thoughts.
No, well, to be honest, I think David's covered it, but the public-facing one, I thought that would be the key. CRM, yes, I expected that to be second as well. So I think it's not surprising at all. I think you've got some very sensible people on it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing those polls and then move on to actually officially bring in Neil and David. So I'm going to come to you, Neil, first. Really, I suppose, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and what the project that you were doing at RTPI, and kind of why did you decide to embark on this?
Okay, sure. Thank you for first of all having me, Joyce and Alan, and the Hart Square team on this. I'm privileged to actually be here today because I think actually discussing this topic, which is what I think is becoming one of the cornerstone of digital success, going forward. As you know, my name is Anil Ramdan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of the RTPI. I've been with the Institute for quite a few years. My background is all IT, always been IT over the last 2 decades. It started off at IT support, and then it's transitioned into more into a senior role where it's about strategic and emerging technologies and helping the Institute to go through what we class as a digital transformation. So we've been through quite a few journeys already when it comes to transformation, things like CRM with Smart Impact, a new website, integration to a website. We've done cloud solutions. We've moved all our technology into the cloud from our offices. Lots and lots of digital changes that's important to organizations now if you want to keep relevant and effectively keep going. So yeah, that's pretty much my background. As I said, we've been doing lots of other digital projects, but the key one for us, and the most exciting one at the moment, is embarking on this journey with Smart Impact about getting our online applications, because currently the RTPR applications is done via PDFs. You can download them, fill them in, and send them back to us. Very old-fashioned way. And in fairness, it was always one of our key agendas, but we never managed to get to it. And we spent a lot of time trying to work out our processes first, because with applications, we've got quite a complicated system at the RTPI, not unusual to any other membership body, but it is very complicated. We're sitting down with the Smart Impact team, especially David and his team, because it is about, we know what our process is, but how do we make it really clear for our members and our prospective members to sign up to? And that was really the challenge we posed to Smart Impact and David and his team, because if you don't get that right, you're going to fail effectively. So we spent a lot of time doing the background work. And most of this credit really goes to our membership team, because they're the ones doing the heavy lifting, because it's their process, right? And we've got to get it right onto the website. So it's been a challenge, and it's going to be great, because I think the focus is about user experience. And user experience isn't just about the website, though, because user experience is about the entire organization, how we deliver things, even when people get into our building, what's their experience in interacting with us, and then the website, and then other things, your social media. It's all about that experience and what people see you as, and how your brand is, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's quite an interesting topic, which is a small piece to a multi-faceted area. But yeah, it's very interesting at the moment. I think, as I said, it's quite an important step for any organization moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, Neil, as you say, rightly said, you've been working on, many different projects, looking at lots of different systems over the years, but kind of, bringing it all together. And I like your comment about, this is something we've always planned to do, but it's the priorities, isn't it? It's making things a priority. So I suppose thinking about sort of, as you mentioned, there's been some challenges. What would have been sort of challenges really on getting, this project started? And I suppose then, following on from that, any other sort of challenges that you've been seeing along that journey as things have been going on? Sort of what are the main challenges you faced around this?
I think it's understanding how you present stuff. It's everyone thinks, oh yeah, you just throw it on the website and people fill in a form, and it's far simpler in a way, because what you need to do is make it realistically as easy as possible in the journey, because I think sometimes we overthink it, and we think we need to make it complicated to cover every element of it, and what we end up doing is causing it, making it difficult for people to follow instructions, especially an application form, because applications sometimes can be really challenging, especially the length of information and the details we want of our members. So I think the biggest challenge was, how do we take this paper form and make it an interactive process? And that was the number one challenge. How are we going to do this, and who are we going to do it with? Because it might not have been Smart Impact, if I'm honest with you. It would have been our web design company, because they're the masters of that area. But actually, when we started to look deeper into the project and understand truly what we think our members' needs were, it started to tail off that maybe Smart Impact were the best company because of their understanding of user experience. And I think that's the key for us, is first of all, identify what you truly need, and then have the right partner for it, because what your needs are, and if your partners don't understand your needs, you've lost, So I think it's aligning those two first of all, and then the next steps will, okay, how do we make sure that the partner understands what our needs are now to be able to deliver. So
Yeah.
it's one of those step-by-step thing, and it has been going for probably about a year now. So it's not like a let's get this together in a couple of weeks. This has been a long going process because, truly speaking, once you launch this, it has to be right. I mean, we can always tweak things, of course you can, and especially with digital things, you can always move them because they will change. But it was really core for us to understand it and get it right from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's a really good point. You're sort of talking about the length of time on this, because I think very often people have the misconception that these things can all be just done really quickly. And completely to your point, Neil, you know, you need to take your time and make sure you understand what is the scope of this, what are we trying to achieve, so that you and the partner are completely aligned. Because otherwise, if you're not, then you're going to have, more problems further along. So I'll be bringing David in a minute, but I suppose just a last question for you at the moment is, if you had to give some, you're a year along this journey, any practical advice that you would give to any organizations? I mean, you've touched on kind of that requirements, but that you would kind of say, if you were starting thinking about this, these are some of the things I think you should really highlight, focus on.
Yeah, no, I think there is a few practical ones. I mean, like any institute, ours is quite a small one, so budget is quite important, And where it comes with budget, we need to make sure that we get the best experience out of our budget and resource for starters. So you've got to be mindful that you're never going to be able to do and deliver everything in one go necessarily, but it's kind of maximizing the UX experience and getting the most out of with it within your budget, and also focus on the high impact areas. What are the bits that you really want to make sure that are critical for delivery? Because everything else you can do later on. But if it's the high impact one, definitely. And I guess it's also about constant feedback, because we're trying to make sure that we understand if things are changing, we need to be aware of it. What we don't want to do is have people tell us in 2 years' time, this is terrible. So we need to constantly get that feedback to be able to improve and make sure that we're satisfying our members, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that feedback loop, isn't it? I think that's a really good point. David, I want to bring you in now, if I may. So really, I suppose the first bit is, David, if you can tell us a bit about sort of your background and experience in the world of UX.
Sure. I don't know if you want to progress your slide. I was chomping at the bit to
I
jump in.
know.
Could you just see my lips quivering?
I could. Moved on to you.
I mean, just a couple of things there. Thank you, Anil, for the kind words that you've said about this relationship and how it's working. And I have to say, the RTPI took a leap of faith. Businesses like Smart Impact have historically, because we deliver CRM, been associated with more of that side of the infrastructure and the estate, as it were. But over the last 10-15 years, we've all been doing web, and one of the things that I've noticed is that, and this is actually, I have to say, credit to Alan on this call. I used to work with him, and he had a big focus on experience, as probably one of the leaders thinking that this is something that's missing in this industry. This is about 8 years ago. So we really embarked on a mission to make this an important aspect of what we do. And fundamentally, because people think, oh, it's a business system, they kind of automatically, I think there's an unwritten sort of feeling in the back of their minds that we can't do much to change how the interface appears. And they don't actually realize a lot of the time that the tools are within your gift. Your partner just needs to let you know what's possible, and always start the process going, what do we need to achieve? As Alan said, the job to be done. Don't think about it about the technology is driving the experience. No, the need of the user is driving the experience. So that's the first thing to wrap your head around. I think one of the key challenges I've come across time and time again is this battle with internal stakeholders about supremacy, what's more important, and especially if you're looking at information architecture on a website, for instance, how you organize your navigation. Just as a fairly basic example, and I'm going to come back to this a bit later and say that, illustrate how that paradigm is about to change actually moving forward. But you'll have different business units, you'll have events, you'll have membership, you'll have CPD, and then you'll have your diversity and inclusion people, all kind of battling each other for who's most important here. Everyone is most important, but it's not you in the room, it's all of the people who are not in the room. So this introspective stakeholder focus tends to be one of the major challenges to surmount. I think the way you deal with it is by including everyone in the conversation from the get-go, because the last thing you want to do is end up with an output that didn't have any reference with any of the other people who have a vested interest in what you're delivering. So key thing, collaboration and transparency. The benefit of that is way beyond the project, by the way. And we've seen this time and time again. I've been in discovery sessions where it was the first time that people who'd been working for 5-6 years in a business had ever been in the same meeting together. Sometimes I was quite flabbergasted at this as a concept, that you could be working in the same business and you'd never have had a meeting with someone for 3 years or 4 years until that moment. But beyond that, what we saw as an outcome of that was everyone was going, oh, actually, your problems are not dissimilar to mine. So when they're working in silos, they're kind of thinking that their problems are unique to them and no one cares about them. And then when you get everyone together and you have the shared common objective, which is to deliver the best user experience to your public-facing audience, i.e. your members and prospective members or donors, for instance, everyone was like, actually, we're all suffering from the same challenges, so why don't we work together? So I think that very much is about the collaborative mindset and the spirit of achieving something as a team, rather as in siloed organizational units. I think one of the things I didn't say was really about my own history, but I don't like to talk too much about myself, but I've been doing this for many years. I've worked for pure digital agencies prior to joining the wonderful area of NFP solutions, which includes CRM and web. I've brought with me a lot of user experience background because that's what I focused on prior to embarking on my journey with this particular sector, which is nigh on 10 years now. And I saw there was an appetite for this, and it was just great to end up working with people like Alan and then subsequently Anil and their other clients along the way who really bought into the idea. I think one of these things is also potentially a little bit generational, because as we see stakeholders become more digitally fluent, they by default have an expectation around user experience. So you have that transition from the old tin box approach to technology to the more sort of everyone is dealing with technical solutions on a daily basis. You don't think twice about how you interact with your phone, by the way. So I try and take that paradigm and say, well, why should you have to think twice any more than you need to with any interaction? And another one of the key challenges, and we've spoken about this a couple of times, we lightly touched on it, is really complex application processes. They are a necessity. If you're going to apply to be a chartered member of an Institute of Engineering of some description, or the RTPI, you're going to effectively be accredited with some sort of status that says you are the best at this. So that needs to be a very well-governed process of allowing you to have that status. So you can't avoid the need to capture the amount of information that's necessary for a chartered membership application. But what you can do is make it a lot easier for the end user to provide you with that information. So the key hints about this, and I think a lot of the time looking at user experience, people think, oh, I've got to spend a load of money on it. I've got to go and design and develop a brand new website. That's not true. Actually, there are things that are within your gift right away, and one of them is as simple as the language that you use. It's sometimes it beggars belief how bad the language is for people who don't know what your business is about, because the assumptions in content creation are that everyone knows what this acronym means. Just putting 10 acronyms on a page and not qualifying them out to say what these stand for is really bad user experience. So something as simple as that. Another thing which is really, again, it's quite I would say a little bit concerning how this is something that people haven't thought. It makes more sense if I actually told someone up front what I expected from them before they filled it in. So how many times have we gone to a website that's asked us to create an account, ask for a password, doesn't tell us what the password requirements are, and you don't find out until you hit the save button, and then it tells you there's an error in your password. You need at least 3 capital characters, 6 special symbols, and I don't know, an umlaut Hart and something else. You know what I mean, but that sort of thing. Tell me in advance what you expect, so then I don't have an error in my entry of that thing. But it's just simple things like that. They're right within such easy reach, but sometimes much easily forgotten because they're not so blatantly obvious. People are always focusing on, oh, it looks a little bit out of date. Actually, you don't have to change that design. You just need to probably address your language as the first port of call. If you've got a content management system, it's a pretty easy task. So that's something I think is very important. I think continual testing and validation of your outputs is a very important aspect of success as well. I don't think it's a smart move to assume that just because the stakeholders have been doing this stuff for 5-10 years, that they are the best arbiters of if you got it right. We can get it right to a certain extent in terms of the business needs and the expertise and experience of someone like myself, for instance, but I'm not really going to know until I've tested it on an audience that's indicative of who's actually going to be using it in anger. So don't underestimate the importance of engaging with, say, a small subsection of your membership body to say, can you test this for us? Send them a link. Just say, give us your feedback. Here's a, you can comment on it. Just tell us if this works for you. If you do that in advance, then you don't go into build with something that's fundamentally not going to work. And I think the sort of major bit of advice about this is to don't lose faith, because everything seems like it's really hard sometimes when you haven't addressed it ever in history. But you just have to chip away at it and do it one bit at a time. And like I said, if that bit is just as simple as saying your password needs to have 8 characters rather than saying nothing, then that's a step in the right direction. And what you'll find, the more of that you do, the more ingrained it becomes and the more second nature it becomes as well, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who's involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. They don't lose faith. We've got some great questions coming in. I just want to say, Kate, who's joined us, you've raised a hand, but if you have a question, if you put it into the Q&A box, and I can make sure that we get to that. So really, I want to, I suppose, Neil, just quickly before I bring up the next poll, I just wanted to bring you in onto that kind of, to David's point about the don't lose faith. I suppose for you, how important has that been, sort of where you are now and where you've been along the journey?
Do you know, it's a really, really important one, because I think we're all getting bogged down with about what is great, what is good, and especially with the new things about how do we make it more accessible. Lots of organizations like ours immediately think, oh gosh, we've got to rebuild our website, we've got to change. And I think we need to take a step back, which we've done, in fairness and credit to our marketing team, and gone, okay, well, we don't need to rebuild. What we need to is rethink, how do we present this information better? How do we make it more accessible, more intuitive? And I think there's a learning here, because you can't afford to keep rebuilding because you think you've got it wrong. What you've got to do is keep changing, and it's part of the evolvement, really. You evolve over time with anything. But to David's point, is don't give up. Basically, get support, get help, and it doesn't cost huge amounts. If you think about what are, as I said earlier, about the impact areas, what do we really need to change? What do we need our members to see and do? And then you can change the site slowly across. But a lot of the times you speak to people and go, oh, well, it's time to rebuild the website. No, it's not really about that. So you have to be smart about it, because we can't afford to keep doing these things all the time. We have to make sure that we can be with a platform. For example, we're with Umbraco at the moment, and they've got a nice roadmap which allows us to continuously change, because nobody wants to see a dated website, certainly not language or information. So we have to constantly be going, like David said, get feedback, make sure that we're constantly listening to what the users want rather than what we think they want. And that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is a question which I'll cover off in a minute, sorry, David, around user experience. But Anita, actually just thinking, was there any kind of comm strategy put in place to for a comm strategy out to members while you were doing this project? Is that something that you had been doing as part of this? Or if you didn't, is it something that, maybe in hindsight you would have done?
Yeah, no, and in fairness to the membership team, they started an engagement management team. So they've got an engagement team, and effectively they went out and started to do a look at what are the MVPs, what's the member value propositions we need to really click onto. And that's where a lot of this stuff came from. So what is our members' needs are? How are we delivering that? How can we add more value to them you know, and clearly one of our ways is digital. We have to make sure that whatever we're offering them is very clear. If it's social media or if it's our website or anything we do with them, even in our communications for you know, a member bulletin, is it engaging? Is it informational? Is it accessible in the way it's presented? So I think a lot of that came back out of our engagement team, and we're going to have try and deliver on that. And I think that was David's point about finding out where you are, what you need to be doing better, and then start working towards it, to be honest with you. And it's not an easy journey, by the way. It's going to be complicated, it's going to be long, but it's going to be rewarding because you will end up with really good outcomes.
I have to say that the brief we got from the RTPI about this was one of the most detailed and well thought out. They'd put so much effort into getting to that point. It was actually a joy to receive it and to be able to just go, we can make this happen for you. It's a testimony to how well something can be described from the business's perspective before they even go to the partner to say, how are we going to make this a reality? So it made a big difference. And I have to say, throughout, it was all about this has to be as straightforward for the end user to complete as possible. It was wherever it was a relevant statement, it was made, but it was a consistent thread throughout every part of the brief document. So thank you, Anil. It's always good to work with that quality and understanding, by the way. It helps a lot.
Thanks, David. I think in fairness to the team, it's the membership team that really tried to make sure that after so many years of having a paper form application, we needed to make sure that you guys got the right brief, because we could be going around in circles if we didn't give you the right brief. So that's always a good starting point. So credit to those guys because they did all the hard work on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. You know, having a very clear, everybody on the same page about what you're trying to achieve is just the right direction for success. So I just want to bring up another quick poll before we move on to questions. So bear with me while I bring that up. So what we're asking in this poll is, what is the biggest challenge your organization faces when it's coming to using UX technologies? So I'm going to let this run just for a couple of seconds. So one of the questions around budget or resources, difficulty implementing best practice, lack of leadership, lack of knowledge around UX, or resistance to change from staff. So I'm just going to give this one another couple of seconds. Budget's winning at the minute, which I don't think probably would surprise anybody. But let me end that.
No, it's lack of knowledge is catching up.
It is catching up. So yes, yes, David, your thoughts.
Well, an interesting one. Budget's always the first one because I can tell you from experience, and this is actually a cultural shift as well in terms of how we approach, say, a new business prospect. Historically, because you're thinking these systems provide me with CRM and portal, design becomes a lower sort of priority element in terms of your budget. I actually say that paradigm needs to shift. You need to consider that it's probably as important as anything else, because if you get it wrong, the rest of it will actually not be successful in the way that you might have hoped. So to rob Peter to pay Paul is a bad idea when it comes to doing adequate discovery and design, but budget always dictates you need to spend it on the tech, on the licenses, and so on and so forth. So I think just being pragmatic about it, finding an extra 5 to 10 days on a budget that might be in the hundreds of K is not a great ask when you think about the value it's going to return to you. So I think some of the evidence, and Alan showed you that 13% uplift as a statistic, but I've got ones that are more close to home for a big membership organization that deals with architecture in the UK. I will remain unnamed. You can figure it out. But in a previous job, we did a whole UX exercise on their directory to find an architect, and the uplift change when it was launched within, I think the first month was more along 300 to 400%. So that is the difference of good versus bad in terms of research driven user experience output. And it was so research driven that the UX consultant even went to the Ideal Home show to poll people on their way out to say, how would you like to find your architect for your home extension or what have you. So just the whole concept of going and interrogating the end user made the difference. I think this one with lack of UX knowledge or expertise, I don't think that people are being fair on themselves. Everyone has UX knowledge because everyone's a user. So this is actually one of the points I had scribbled together as I was listening to everything else, is just the application of common sense. User experience, more often than not, is just common sense. And as Alan pointed out, accessibility is a key element as well. But if you make something fundamentally good from a user experience perspective, accessibility kind of takes care of itself. There are some nuances around it in terms of if you want to pass these various tests that are automated, site improve and whatnot. But the reality is, something has to be accessible to be usable, in my opinion. So those two things go hand in hand. But just think about yourself as a user. You don't have the experience per se because you haven't been to UX school, but you buy things from Amazon. You surf the web. You look at ridiculously long listing pages for something like LinkedIn, and you don't think twice about it. I mean, I come across every now and again this concept of above and beneath the fold on a web page, what I can see before I have to scroll. And I say to people, that paradigm's gone now because people have become so used to scrolling on phones. Think about something different because that obsession is no longer relevant. So I think we are all experts because we're all users. I don't think you need to hire someone specifically to perform that function. I think a good partner, as Anil has alluded to, is going to be able to provide the more sort of detailed outputs regarding what you're looking for in terms of development of customer journey maps and so on and so forth. But you're the best arbiter of what's usable because you're a user. So don't consider that you don't have the expertise. Every time you buy something, you've got expertise. You know how quick that journey was on Amazon. Let's also be aware of the fact that they literally spend millions every year on improving UX, and you don't even notice it. It's a very interesting concept there. Have you ever noticed Amazon change? I think the answer is probably not really. But if you go and look at the Wayback Machine for Amazon from 2013 to Amazon at 2024, you're going to see it looks quite different, but you never noticed it change. And I think this is back to what Anil said, which is that you build it, but then you continually improve it. So you don't have to keep doing this big bang. So the next time you embark on a project of this nature, consider that we build it once and we improve it forever. And then the only time we really need to actually go with a potentially much bigger investment in it is when we need to do a platform upgrade, because we've been focusing on user insights, feedback, and we've been acting on it in real time, as it were, as opposed to letting it all sort of stack up into a big snowball of disgruntlement from the user's perspective, and then having the cost that's associated. And it brings it back full circle. If you take a continuous improvement mindset, the cost is far more manageable.
Absolutely. So I'm really conscious of time. So I'm going to hand back to Alan and then we will get to questions. So Alan.
Thanks, Joyce. So actually, it brings us timely to what David was saying. Kind of, we always try and sort of provide these takeaways in our webinar, 6 tips to ensure success. This one specifically around building this kind of user experience culture across the organization. And listening to some of the things that Anil and David have said makes me actually want to update this. So these are just mine, but I think there's probably more that will come out of these. I think we could probably have 16 tips, and we still probably wouldn't have.
That would be bad user experience, Alan, because of the too many tips.
Agreed, but anyway, so let's launch into my 6 tips, and happy to take any questions on these. Please do get some questions in as we get close to the final Q&A session for this morning's webinar. So, in terms of 6 tips to ensure success, number 1, I think is educate and evangelize. I think actually that's really what we've got here today. Is we've got 2 really strong evangelists on the topic of user experience, and I think it's really telling. And I think there's fair credit to be paid here to Anil. Anil's title is Chief Technology Officer. Usually chief technology officers tend to think too much about the functionality and the systems and the architecture and all that stuff, but I think what Anil has shown here is kind of a real insight into the fact that all of those things come together. The glue that puts them all together is the kind of user experience piece. And so I think there's a lot of credit there to not see these things as just technical implementation. So I would try and find ways of promoting a great user experience appreciation across the organization. And I think one of the things that's great about the NFP sector is that there is a desire to share and to learn from others. So, if one organization has done something great, I think actually, forums like this where we're sharing these examples are great opportunities for other people in the industry to look at what others have done and to share that success. So I think trying to cultivate this shared understanding of UX's value across the organization could be as simple as just asking people to give their thoughts on it. Run an internal poll to say, what would you improve on our user experience? And it just lets people feel like they're involved and they have something to say on this topic. Really important here for me is to align things to strategic goals. So I would ask certain people in an organization to look at what the strategic goals are of an organization. It might be the membership strategy, it might be a donor strategy, it might be something like gaining new volunteers. But it's to then look at those organizational objectives and identify where those goals, a couple of them, could benefit from improved customer experience, which is probably going to come down to an improved user experience. And then I would set the priorities. I wouldn't try to take on too much, but I think I would set the priorities around that. And then I think something that's kind of really come across today sort of is the understanding of the cross-functional collaboration around looking at this and saying all elements of the RTPI kind of have to take responsibility for it. And that requires everyone to kind of collaborate across those processes. So you've got people in the membership team working with people and on the technology implementation side, and everybody coming together to improve the overall user experience. And I think something that's interesting that I think maybe, I'd ask, maybe if David or Renal could talk about is in the Q&A if possible, is just the fact that this isn't just about the website, that there has been attention going to be paid to the user journey for the staff, because if the staff can support, someone on the phone call and make that journey, but, 2 minutes quicker for someone looking for advice and guidance, then an improved user experience on the CRM can aid that. Incremental, achievement, kind of something that David was sort of talking about in sort of the foundations of creating an ongoing continuous improvement process is just start small, don't take on too big a piece of work. I think if there are areas that you can look at on the website and make improvements, as David said, you have a content management system, you can make content improvements. Go through your content and look for, are you using too many acronyms that might be known to you and to people who've been in your industry for 10 or 15 years, but maybe students or people who are looking to enter the industry aren't so au fait with those acronyms. So there's a lot of things that you can do in terms of quick wins to break this down. And then I think this is kind of key for me in terms of being able to make this cultural shift and to get everybody on board is to appoint a UX champion. In an ideal world, this will be someone who has kind of board level access who can fight that case. You can see there's 1 or 2 questions that allude to budget, and we could see from the previous poll that budget can be a challenge. But I think that's because we don't have UX champions on boards. We don't have people who are saying we should be spending more. I think in Hart Square, we're working with a particular client where UX is probably the #1 driving factor, and it drives a lot of their thinking, which is great. And I think that's because they've got board level representation across the board, actually, for an appreciation of how important UX is to their charity and how it enables their goals. So I think that's a really important one. And then to finish it off is really to try and make everyone's responsibility kind of UX shared, and that is to integrate those principles around keeping it simple. What can you do to make it accessible? Understand the job to be done, focus on that, minimize the frustration. What can you do to improve that overall user experience for your donors or stakeholders or members? And it will create a sort of snowball, of effect. And I think then you'll get investment to make future investments. So if you get everybody on board, you'll generally have more buy-in for things. So over to our Q&A section. We haven't got a lot of time left, but we've got some great questions. So let's see if
we have great questions, and if we don't get through them all, we will answer them offline and send out the answers. Anil, I'm going to come to you first. You have kind of touched on this a bit, but how can non-profit organizations produce high quality user research to support UX design given our limited resources? So that work around the user research.
So I guess it's a tricky one because depending how much, sorry, I missed the first bit. Was it about budget? Because my
It was sorry, it's, how to put together, high quality user research, limited resources. So I suppose that could be budget or people.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem we had, which was effectively we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't think we were experienced enough or knowledgeable enough. And that's a tricky thing for people in organizations like ours, is that we think, and David mentioned, he goes, everyone's got the knowledge. I don't necessarily agree with him there. I think actually we all have different perception of what we think we expect to see and how the user journey should be online. So I think what the truth is, you need to kind of go out to the members and figure out what they want and then work out what can you deliver within your budgets. And that budget isn't just, okay, UX is start and stop. UX is not going to stop. UX is continuous. And there should always be that, a bit like digital, really, in our digital transformation or modernization or innovation projects. There's always going to be a need for it because it can't stop. Our members don't stop, so our digital innovation and UX can't stop. So I think you constantly have to say, we will continuously upgrade and change. And it won't be cheap, but it doesn't necessarily have to be too expensive neither. I mean, there is a point about, earlier you mentioned budget knowledge. For me, budget knowledge and partnership is the key. We have the budget we get from our trustees, then we get the knowledge within the staff and the members, and then we go to our partners and say, we would like to do this. How do we do it best? You're the experts, help us with this. And then with that combination, I think you can actually deliver quite a lot over a period of time, not overnight. There's no silver bullets on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you've actually answered a second question that came in around budget, and I think that's really good. David, I'm going to come to you with a question which I think you're going to love, but I'm going to say, conscious of time, so a short answer.
I understand, Joyce.
What are your thoughts on using AI to improve user experience?
Right, okay, I'll make it quick because I think AI will do a couple of things. Not I think, I know. One is that the immediate sort of way that it will improve user experience is in findability of content. I think it's probably the best suited tool right now if you've got the mainstay of your content provision are reports and other published articles and stuff of that nature. I could envisage a future where you don't actually have a website in the way you think about websites anymore, and it's literally an assistant that is so well trained that all you have to do as an end user is interact in a conversational manner to get back whatever you want from it. Now, I know it sounds like, oh, we've always been promised that, but it's like any exercise where you haven't put the prerequisite amount of time into designing it to begin with. So I've kind of looked at this from the perspective of the paradigm changes from being visual design to being the generative assistant design. So you're training this GPT agent to effectively understand your business and how people are looking for your content. And then your website no longer even requires navigation. So I think that's something you're going to see more and more of moving forward for content-rich websites where their main function is to deliver a lot of published collateral that's industry sort of recognized and so on and so forth. I think another thing you can consider is that anything you can measure, you can also provide instruction to act on that measurement. And it's not outside of the realms of possibility. In fact, it is happening in some instances, but it's in its nascency. The ability to modify the way that content is laid out on a page based on what people are doing and what your business objectives are and what users really want to see. And so again, you get this to happen in an automated fashion. You're effectively looking at behaviors and then saying, do these align with these objectives based on user needs and business objectives? If not, what needs to be moved around in order to make it more likely to, say, be read or to be clicked on? And that can happen automatically using AI. So the modification of interface using AI is actually not a difficult thing, but telling AI what to change, when to change it, that initial training is the major sort of obstacle, as it were. And I think this is true for all AI. I'm wrapping this up now, Joyce. With AI, it's as good as what you tell it to do. So it's on its own, it's going to be pretty generic. But the more you refine how you've trained it, and the more that you sort of enable the assistant to understand your business and your collateral and your users, and then it obviously works this out over time as well. But you need to give it a good basic foundation of that knowledge. It can become your most important tool in terms of content provision. But It's not replacing anyone, by the way, and it's certainly not replacing designers, because I've seen some of the stuff it comes up with, and I'm just going to leave that my comments for another forum.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, David. And Anil, just really quickly, was AI a consideration or something that was part of when you were scoping this out? Was that consideration or?
I think it is a consideration for certain, but it's not something that we would probably think it'll impact us straight away. It will definitely become something that, as David said, will impact the site, or at least enable the site to be better in the future rather than anything else. So I think it's about, as you say, finding information simpler on the site.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. So, gentlemen, as always, we're running out of time. I'm going to hand back to Alan.
Thanks very much, Joyce. So I've got a quote here that I think we won't get our time to present it up, but I'll just talk it through, which is a great quote from a guy called Frank Chimero, and it says, "People ignore design that ignores people." So I'd encourage people to think about that. I'll repeat that again. People ignore design that ignores people. So put people at the center of your design thinking and your culture, and I think you can achieve some amazing things. So I wanted to say thank you to our guests today for joining us and for contributing and for sharing their thoughts and experience on this. As always, that is really appreciated for all of our guests. And to everyone who had joined us today, appreciate the time that you've spent. And for anyone who's joined us on one of our webinars this year. So thank you to everyone, and wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
Yes, indeed. Thank you all
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.